Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really happy to speak to this group. So everyone can hear me, I'm hoping. I see some nod. Okay. And my slides actually change when I press this button. Hopefully. Okay. So I'll start with this kind of obligatory type of philosophy of science, scientific method kind of slide with nothing controversial on it, I hope. So a kind of standard scientific method type picture of the world, picture of what we do in science is we have some phenomenon in the real world that we want to model, and we mix that with our theoretical understanding of how it should work to produce models, usually some kind of reductionist type models, like it could be a differential equation or it could be some kind of game theoretic model. And we use our models then to explain observations, predict things about the world, and we check their fit to real data. And then we revise the theory, revise the model, and so on. And that's kind of how we do things. So what I want to talk about here is something that slots in at the modeling stage of this. It's a different way of producing reductionist models. You can see it as a framework for it or a language for that or something like that, using different methods from artificial intelligence, particularly a particular branch called multi-agent reinforcement learning. You can see this as something that slots in the same place that like iterated prisoner's dilemma would slot into the picture. It's something that it's a reductionist model of something in the world, and we can set up different kinds of models like this to model different things, make different kinds of predictions. And why would we want to do this? I'm going to argue in this talk that this gives us some different affordances that we wouldn't have with other models. The main contrast being kind of traditional like matrix game type models. And in particular, I'm going to talk about how you will gain greater abilities to make different kinds of factors be endogenous versus exogenous. Things that seemed like they had to be exogenous choices, it's possible to make them emerge endogenously within these kinds of models. And then more poetically, I've put that as freedom from the tyranny of the payoff matrix. And hopefully it will make sense by the end of the talk what I mean by that. Okay, so I like to start with this slide from, has these two proverbs from Leonard Savage's Foundations of Statistics. He was the originator of Bayesian decision theory in the 1950s, and he was talking about this in the context of like, what's the domain of applicability of Bayesian decision theory? He said, Bayesian decision theory applies to small worlds. Small worlds are characterized by the proverb, they are places where you can always look before you leap. And they're contrasted with large worlds where you must sometimes cross that bridge when you come to it. So it's the world of look before you leap versus the world of cross that bridge when you come to it. And he was trying to restrict the domain of Bayesian decision theory, saying it should really only apply this in small worlds. But it's not just Bayesian decision theory, it's also true of other kinds of decision theories and planning methods and things like that. A lot of the work in kind of traditional matrix game theory is also small world type theory, as well as, if you have extensive form games with a small number of, small tree, it's also a very small world. Large worlds are the domain of evolution or of reinforcement learning and various other methods. In a large world, you might need to explore. There may be unknown unknowns. In game theory terminology, we can call this incomplete information. That's different from imperfect information. It means that the rules of the game itself are unknown and must be, you have to explore to discover them. So this talk is going to be about large worlds. Since the mid-20th century, we have worked on small worlds because they were tractable. And many theorists got so used to small worlds that they forgot the real world was large. But now large worlds are tractable too in reductionist type models. So the question is, what kind of models do we want to look at that are large, but still not the real world? Okay, so this is probably a relatively obvious slide to this crowd, I think. The traditional matrix game picture has lots of limitations. So let's say we want to study social dilemmas. Real world social dilemmas, like anything you might want to model with your matrix game, they're obviously extended over time and space. Things like cooperation and defection aren't just like atomic actions. You don't just choose cooperate now or defect now. You choose behaviors that have many component parts.
Recording in progress.
Something's kind of an echo happening now. I'm getting weird feedback. Something's going on with the sound. Maybe it stopped. Can anyone hear me? Okay, there was some kind of like recording echo happening. Anyway, so right, so cooperation and defection are are behaviors, not like single choices, right? They have subparts. They can be graded, of course. You can be more or less cooperative. Also, decisions are not like just simultaneous, like in an iterated prisoner's dilemma type model. You are assuming that decisions always happen like in this time locked, like now we cooperate or defect, now we cooperate or defect, now we cooperate or defect. That's not really how it is in the real world. They could be overlapping in different ways, not just like time locked like that. And maybe cooperation takes longer than defection or vice versa. Maybe that matters. Also, there's partial information and there are unknown unknowns and incomplete information. And I think one of the most important ones is that learning is about not just learning what to do, but also learning how to do it. That matters a lot. So there are things like practice and rehearsal, and these are very difficult to address in a matrix game. Like you have to learn how to implement your policy. Let's say I want to cooperate, but I don't know how to cooperate. That could matter quite a lot, especially if the ease of cooperation versus defection maybe differs. And it's not clear which one should be easier or harder. It's going to depend on the problem. Okay. The kinds of models I'm going to talk about are within the class of things that can be called agent-based models, but they're probably going to be different from other agent-based models you may have heard about. But they do have the basic structure in that they consist of two parts, really. There's a model of an environment and a model of individual behavior. And you put those together and you have some model of like a whole social ecological system. You assume that there's typically many individuals and they're all have some model that applies to them. And okay, so what's really different here in the kinds of things I'm going to talk about is more sophisticated models of individual decision making. And because we have more sophisticated models of individual behavior, we can also attach them to more sophisticated models of the environment, in principle anyway, and to some extent in practice. So this is just a kind of a taxonomy slide of different kinds of things you could use as models of individual decision making in an agent-based model. There's broadly two categories: things that are prospective versus things that are retrospective. Prospective pictures are ones where agents are these are very natural in economics, the prospective picture. They are a picture where an agent is deciding what to do by thinking about the future and saying, okay, if I were to do this, then I would end up in that possible world, and that possible world would be better than other possible worlds. So I will do that and go there. That's how prospective reasoning broadly works. Traditional game theory models are often like seen that way, like backwards induction is like, if I were to be there, it's that kind of logic. Also, on the other side, the retrospective side, this is more like there's really two big pictures here, evolution and learning from experience. But they both have in common that they're based on the past. So instead of thinking about the future so much, you think about, well, in the past, when I was in this kind of situation, was it good or bad? And variations on that. So evolution has that structure, and reinforcement learning is like that. In evolution, it's like, was this has this trait had fitness in the past, is how you explain the presence of things in the present. And in reinforcement learning, it's like, well, whatever was reinforced, behaviors that were reinforced in the past are expected to be there in the present. That logic comes from Skinner, actually. The analogy is from Skinner too. And now there are reinforcement learning algorithms, which are called model-free reinforcement learning algorithms, which are particular ways of encapsulating this, which is mainly what I'm going to talk about. There are also model-based reinforcement learning algorithms, and there are also hybrid algorithms that do both retrospective and prospective. So all of these things kind of can come together, and in the kind of framework I'm talking about, we can kind of broaden it out to consider both retrospective and prospective at the same time. But mainly what I'm actually going to talk about today will be on the retrospective side. And until recently, most of the algorithms that had been working well were on the retrospective side. Maybe now slightly starting to change. But this talk will still be on mostly retrospective. Okay, so how does it actually work? So this is the basic reinforcement learning picture. I'm going to call this a solipsistic reinforcement learning picture because it's a single agent picture. I'm going to make it a multi-agent picture in a few slides, but we have to start with this. So the basic way to see how this is all going to fit together, and by the way, this is the only math in the entire talk. It'll be very fast. So there's an agent interacting with an environment. An agent sends actions to the environment, and then the environment takes in those actions and outputs rewards, which go to the agent, as well as a change in its internal state. The state is observed by the agent, sometimes directly or sometimes only partially. And the agent makes actions on the basis of what it observes. So reinforcement learning researchers think in terms of this endless sequence of state, action, reward, next state, next action, next reward, next state, next action, next reward, on and on. The parts of the formal model are these. So one is you need to have a system dynamics function, also called a transition function. This is the probability of a next state and a reward given a current state and an action. So the agent's in a current state and takes a particular action. This is determining how the environment will transition to a new state and what reward it will obtain for that. Another ingredient is what the objectives here, what the agents want to optimize is called the return. This is the long-term discounted sum of instantaneous rewards. And another ingredient is called a policy. This is the distribution of action given state, seen as a function of state. This you should think of as the model of behavior. So I'll often use the term behavior and policy more or less interchangeable, because if you think about what it is, it's a function that tells you in any state of the world what action would your agent take. And then another last important ingredient here is the value function. So a value this is what you're actually optimizing usually. This is the expected return from acting according to a specific policy. That's what value is. So if I were to act with a given behavior, given policy from a particular state, what is the expected return? And that's usually what we're optimizing. Okay, that's generic reinforcement learning in the single agent solipsistic case. Now, what's deep reinforcement learning? So deep reinforcement learning is just saying that of all these different functions I talked about, you can approximate pretty much any of them with deep neural networks. Deep neural networks are just functions with lots of composition in them and lots of parameters and lots of function composition, so that they are entirely differentiable by the chain rule, and you can take gradients over the whole thing. So in deep reinforcement learning, what you're typically doing is you're going to differentiate according to parameters of this thing, so as to do gradient descent on the return. Okay, and that works. So that's going to be something. Then you have something that tries to change its policy systematically, change its behavior systematically in order to increase the rewards that it's getting. So it's moving toward high reward. Okay. Last technical slide, I swear. So that has so far been an entirely solipsistic picture with one single agent interacting with the world. Now, how do we make this a multi-agent system? The formalism to know is called a partially observed Markov game. And that's what I'll tell you what it is right now. So it is, if you look at this picture, it looks just like the previous picture with an agent and an environment, but now there's just multiple agents. And the only things to know is that each agent has its own stream of observations, its own stream of actions, and its own stream of rewards. All the actions are taken simultaneously into the environment. And the environment has a single state, but that state is only partially known to the agents. So they have observations of it. And those observations may be different from one another because they may be standing in different places, looking in different directions, things like that. And each agent will learn. They have their own neural network, and they optimize their own individual reward. So they get a reward for whatever they did in whatever places they are, and that optimizes their own neural network to produce their own policy. And their fates are interdependent because they live in the same environment. They can see each other, they can take actions that affect one another. So it's really a multi-agent system. It's a game, but it is one where the world has state. And you have to move around and do things. We typically think of actions not like the broad, things that have strategic labels like cooperate or defect, like you would in a matrix game, but instead as like very small elementary things, like move a little bit, flick my finger, walk a little, turn around, and only by adding up a long sequence of very small actions do you get something that could be reasonably called cooperation or defection. Okay. So that's what a partially observed Markov game is. So now let's move toward more how things that are more particular to my line of work, because that's fairly general, everything I've said so far. So one thing I like to think about is multi-agent systems where there are partially observed Markov games, I could say, where there's some kind of resource that makes the agents interdependent. So the environment is going to contain some kind of resource model. Like we could think, if we want to think about common pool resources, we could think about something like a common pasture or something like that. That's going to create incentives that are going to affect all the agents. So it's going to determine what things are rewarded and what things are not. So we can let the agents interact with each other in the environment, and then they adapt their behavior by reinforcement learning, as I just described. And then we do some analysis of the resulting like joint behavior, whatever emerges. And then for most of the experiments I'm about to talk about, the general pattern has been that we perturb the environment or the agents somehow, and we do controlled experiments. And we typically set these things up so that there's some kind of tension between individual and collective rationality, because that's what we're studying. All right. So this is the slide now where I talk about Eleanor Ostrom. But I think this is the one audience where I don't need to do that actually. Basically, what I really want to say, the main thing I want to, really what I say here, actually, the first thing I say is that I've been hugely inspired by her work, and I'm totally thrilled to have been invited to speak to you here today. Yeah, and I talk a bit about her normally on this slide. But anyway, where I get to with this slide is I then say, one thing that's that I took away from her work anyway is that different kinds of resources are really different from each other in that they generate different kinds of interdependencies, and different resources demand different institutions and different ways of organizing cooperation. And that gives us some purchase for a research program based on these new methods of modeling. So I'm going to now talk a bit, I'm going to talk about commons dilemmas, commons pool resource type problems for a little bit. And then I'm going to talk about other kinds of resources as we go on in the slide in the presentation. But first with common pool resources. So this one was inspired a bit by a paper from Marco Janssen in 2010. This is our version of it. It's not exactly the same. We called it Commons Harvest. And like most of our games, they have representations that look like this, where some agents are walking around in a world. They're seeing only around them. They don't see, this is kind of our view from above, but the agents see something around where they actually are, facing the direction that they're facing. It's a 2D world. They are rewarded when they collect an apple. Apples are the universally rewarding thing. In this game, so now to make this a common pool resource, this particular game has these rules where so in this case, apple growth is density dependent. So the more apples there are in a local region, the more quickly they'll grow. And if you remove all of the apples in a particular patch, then that patch will die and no apples will ever grow there again. So that means there's kind of sustainable and unsustainable ways of harvesting. You could kind of go too quickly and deplete the whole patch, and then everything will be gone, and you'll have to move on to another patch, or you'll eventually run out. Also, the episodes last some amount of time, after which the game resets to its initial condition. So this is modeling is some kind of renewable resource where you get some chance to practice. So it's not like a peak oil scenario or something like that, where it's like you get one shot and then it's over, or climate change or something like that. It's more like something that some kind of resource that recurs year after year. You have a chance to do it again every year, and I think there's many things like that. Also important to say. Is that in most of our worlds, including this one, agents have this ability to zap each other with a timeout beam. This is to study sanctioning. So the agent that gets hit gets removed from the game for a while. They can't get any reward while they're removed. There's no intrinsic motivation to use it, and it's kind of a waste of an agent's time. So it's sort of an intrinsic negative, small. But it can be used for studying punishment and stuff like that. And I'll talk about it a bit more later. It's in most of our games. Okay. So let me show you first what this looks like if you run a reinforcement learning agent in Commons Harvest, treating it as a single player game. This is where another point where I say it doesn't actually matter what reinforcement learning algorithm you run. Any reinforcement learning algorithm will learn this. This is a very easy problem. This is effectively the optimal thing to do here, because what the agent has figured out after training, this is after training, this video, is by the way, someone shout out if you can't see the video. I'm assuming everyone can. It has learned that it shouldn't deplete all of the apples in either patch. So it just runs around and always leaves a few apples there, so it always has a chance to, so they'll always grow back by the time it gets back there. And this is pretty much the optimal thing to do. Okay. This will be learned by any reinforcement learning algorithm. It's a very easy problem. The reason it's easy is early on in training, the agents do start depleting all of the apples, but they quickly learn that, like, oh, when I eat all of the apples, then none grow back, and I end up getting a lower reward. So I'll stop doing that and learn the right thing. And that works just fine in the single player case. But now let's look at it in the multi-agent case. And again, this is true no matter what reinforcement learning algorithm you use. They all have the same effect. So this is the point where I have to warn everyone that this video goes very fast. So if you blink, you will miss it. So don't blink. I'll press play. So they all immediately depleted all of the resources. I'll play it again for anyone who blinked. So yeah, that's how it goes. And then they have no resources left for the whole rest of the episode. They all got very, very low scores compared to what they could do. If they would just show restraint a little bit and leave some apples and wait for them to grow back, then they could all continue to eat apples throughout the entire episode and get much, much higher scores than they do. Look, it's, they were done by this point in the episode. And they could have kept going eating up until there. So they would have had much, much higher rewards if they had done that. One last time. So why does it happen? They think about the way the gradients are. So when an agent, say by chance, doesn't take an apple next to it, they don't get a higher reward for that because some other agent probably does take it. So there's no reinforcement for doing the right thing here. The only reinforcement there is, the only gradient, is from the fact that they want to go faster than the others. And so that's what they do. It's a classic tragedy of the commons, race to the bottom type of effect. It's also a bad Nash equilibrium. Okay. So back to this picture. I didn't talk about the excludability dimension, but I think everyone in this audience probably knows what that means. So you get social dilemmas when you have non-excludable resources. Excludability is about like kind of how easy it is to control access. And in kind of game theoretic models, this variable is generally a exogenous thing. You just set up different matrices depending on whether you have an excludable situation or a non-excludable situation. Like we model private goods differently from common pool resources, and that's a basic assumption usually. But with these kinds of methods, there's a way to make it so the difference is maybe more fungible. We might be able to have it so agents can learn to exclude. So here's an example where that happens. So here, this is the same situation as before, but now there are these walls, and agents, remember, they have this zapping timeout beam for sanctioning. And what you'll see them do is, I'll play it while I talk. They learn that they can defend these kind of choke point areas and keep other agents out of the two kind of closed off regions. And once they've learned that, then they are able to learn a sustainable policy because they end up in situations where they are mostly alone for much of the time because they're able to exclude. And only once they've learned that, then they learn the sustainable policy. So it's like they reduce this multi-agent problem, which this is, which was intractable, to the single agent problem, which was easy. That's how this works. Because once they have learned to keep out the others, then they are able to get reinforced. They can assign credit from the fact that, like, oh, I didn't eat that apple and it grew back. Then they can notice that and they can learn the right thing. Okay, so this is some sort of like emergent privatization or emergent territoriality or something like that. But it's through learning, because at the beginning of training here, they do deplete all their resources, the same as they did in the open field one. It's only after they learn this zapping strategy, then they can learn the sustainable strategy in this environment. So it's a case where exclusion has emerged endogenously within the experiment, from learning. Of course, this isn't the best solution we could hope for in this environment. Inequality it's a very unequal outcome here. So maybe there would be better things that we could find. And if agents, if we had a model that cared about inequality, it would score this really badly. But but this is still interesting that it is able to do anything here. Okay. So I've talked about a common pool resource. Now I'm going to talk about something that is a bit closer to a public good. So this is going to be now more like a non-subtractable type thing, where the agents, where the it's more public good like. So this is our public good like dilemma, where it also, like in the other ones, agents are moving around in a 2D world and are rewarded for collecting apples, but the apples are now green instead of red. I have to keep up with our apple colors. And as always, they have a partial viewing window as before. And now here's the rules that make this public good like. So there's the apples grow in a certain region, and it's only when this kind of orchard is fed by an aquifer that comes from a nearby river. And the river fills up with pollution over time. Agents have to go and clean the pollution out of the river. And that they don't get any intrinsic reward for doing that, but once they clean, then that causes apples to grow in the other place. But it's kind of spatially displaced. You'll see what it looks like. So this video shows what no agent would ever learn. No reinforcement learning agent would ever learn this, but I had to show this video to kind of explain the dynamics of the environment. So here you can see that there are two agents, this yellow one and this purple one, that are running around in the river and cleaning all of the pollution. And that's causing lots and lots of apples to appear on the right side. And the other three agents are just running around and eating apples. Now, the reason no agent would actually learn this is that the two agents that are cleaning here are getting zero reward themselves. We had to do something else to make this run. This one, we had to give those agents rewards for cleaning or something to make this this video, because this is not what any self-interested agent would ever learn to do. I just made this video so you can see what it would look like. This next video I'm about to show is about why that is. So in this video, you're going to see what happens very early in training and why the right behavior never gets reinforced. So you see that yellow agent, it did go and clean a little bit, and then it tried to get at that apple that appeared, but another agent grabbed it before it could. And the problem here is, if you keep watching this video, that yellow agent will keep trying a little bit to explore cleaning the pollution and create some apples, but most of the time the apples get eaten before it can get there by the others. If it really cleaned a lot and was very effective at it, then there would be so many apples that everyone could eat. But it's kind of at this early stage of, it's not that effective at cleaning yet. It hasn't really learned how to do it effectively. So it's not and you really need two to be really effective at it, two players to be cleaning at the same time to make a lot of apples. So it's not able to get any reinforcement for this, because the gradients on the other players are getting much more reinforced for free riding, for running around and eating apples. They're getting better at being free riders faster than the contributor is getting better at contributing. Okay. So how can this be resolved? It's a very harsh social dilemma here. And so we haven't found any kind of tabula rasa self-interested approach that solves this, but we have had a pretty large number of different approaches where you have to build in something different in the agent model that can solve it. You can think of them as like models of like nature versus nurture kind of questions, like some kind of innate inequity aversion was one way, which we took from a behavioral economics paper. Also, social value orientation was another way that worked that we took from a social psychology line of work. These are all different papers that have all solved it in different ways. There's an evolutionary group selection type approach where you find the kind of thing you would expect, where if you allow reward functions to evolve and the reward functions can take into account the rewards of others, then you don't get the altruistic ones to evolve unless you use whenever you have a self-interested fitness, you don't get any altruism to evolve. But if you do group selection, then you can, right? As you would expect from evolutionary theory. We've also looked at social influence models and reciprocity models, and then a really cool paper from Dylan Hadfield-Manel at MIT, not our group. They showed that if you give agents the ability to propose and accept contracts that transfer rewards around, that is another way to solve this as well, which is a really cool approach too. So there's a lot of people have been using this, and there's a lot of different ways to solve it. But I'll talk now about how humans solve it and how we have a model of that. So most of these things, except for the contracts one actually, most of them have been like psychological motivations or something like that we're putting into the agent, and we can't really manipulate those in the lab. But there's one approach where there's one way to solve it, which we can manipulate with humans. So and that was reputation. So we thought that people might solve this problem in a way that would be sensitive to anonymity using some kind of reputation notion. So we ran the experiment, having humans play it in the lab, and we manipulated anonymity. And we found that was true. So we had groups of people play it 5 at a time, and we didn't allow them to communicate, but they were all sitting in the same room together at different computers. And we found that they do cooperate in the when they're identifiable, and they don't when they're anonymous. So this seems to argue for some kind of reputation motivation or something like that people have when they're playing this game. Right, so that worked. The anonymity motivation, broke the human cooperation in this. This is what it looked like. You can see that all, they were all the same color in the anonymous case, and they were all different colors in the identifiable case. And then we had a model to try to match the human data, where we put in a reputation motivation into the agent. So this model is assuming kind of common knowledge of what it is that gives you a good reputation. So in this case, cleaning. So it has a signal that tells you that cleaning is the thing that increases your reputation. And then it's a kind of competitive altruism model where agents want to have higher reputations, but they also don't want to be taken advantage of. That's how it works. And that also works. And the model looks a lot like the human data. But so far, this is the kind of thing you could still do with matrix games. The really interesting thing is what you can do in this kind of model that you couldn't have gotten to with a matrix game. And that's, you can ask more detailed questions, like, how do they do it? It's not just cooperate or defect here. It's like you have to do something in the world. And so in particular, what we asked was, did they do it by, did they coordinate by turn taking or by territoriality? By that, we mean, like, well, they could have cooperated by, say, assigning, like, this part of the river is my part, and then that part is your part, and that part is your part, and we're each responsible for our part of the river, and we'll make that part clean. That's one way to solve it that would work. Another way would be like, we take turns, we cut up time instead of space, and it's like, now it's my turn to clean the river, and so I'll clean the whole thing, and then now it's your turn, and then you clean the whole thing, and so on. So this is really a question about how you implement cooperation, and it's very hard to ask it in a more abstracted model. And we found that both humans and our model agents did it by turn taking, and we found in a mediation analysis that the effect of the anonymity manipulation on the final rewards, the collective rewards, was mediated by how much turn taking they were doing. So they were doing more turn taking in the identifiable condition, which was a very cool thing. I wanted to squeeze in one more study before I move on to the discussion session. So I'll talk about this now. So far, I talked about common pool resources, and I talked about public goods. Now I want to talk about a situation where you have multiple public goods and a kind of bargaining situation where agents have different preferences over which public good they want. And they're kind of mutually exclusive public goods. This is the kind of thing that's very, very doable in this sort of setting. Okay, so this is the kind of place where you would talk about conventions. You can see conventions as like equilibria or attractors in a joint policy space, behavior space. We like this kind of simplex picture for thinking about it, where the different conventions are the corners of the simplex. Conventions are kind of the kinds of things where you talk about tipping points and bandwagon effects and things like that. And I like these kind of elliptical sentences that we have on the slide here, like conventions cause learning and conventions are caused by learning. What I mean by that is this, it's kind of this reflexive thing where, whatever the prevailing convention is, that means everyone is doing certain behaviors. That is creating incentives for others to probably usually to follow along, to join the convention. But it's also itself created by the fact that agents have previously learned their way into that convention. So they cause learning and they're caused by learning. Okay, this is the game that we have looked at mainly here. So I'll pause that for a second and talk. So this is a 16-player game. There's been a trend in our work over time toward higher and higher numbers of players. This one has 16 players now. So in this game, and we've moved on from apples, now it's berries. Berries have 3 varieties, red berries, green berries, and blueberries. And the thing about this game, it's called allelopathic harvest because allelopathy is the word for when a plant suppresses the growth of another plant. So the idea here is that each berry variety is suppressing the growth of the others. So what that means is that the per variety, the growth rate increases with the global fraction that are devoted to that variety. So the monoculture fraction is what controls the overall growth rate. So like if they're all blue, then they will all grow very, all the blue ones will grow very, very fast and they'll all be blue. But if it's kind of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, then they'll all grow very slowly. And then we say the different of the 16 agents, half of them prefer to eat red berries, the other half prefer to eat green berries, and no one prefers eating blueberries. But blueberries are still, of course, eating any berry is better than eating nothing. So they would all prefer to be on some kind of monoculture equilibrium, but half of them want red, half of them want green, and no one wants blue. And as always, there's the sanctioning kind of stuff. And this is what it looks like. The flashes of light are when they are planting berries of different colors. They kind of turn the color that they just planted, so we can see more easily what's going on. And I'll kind of just jump forward in the video a little bit so you can see more. It looks like there's a lot of red developing in this particular example. Okay. So a way to see this is a case where there are pro-social. The conventions are all pro-social here. They're like the different monocultures. They're like a possible red convention, a blue convention, a green convention, and they're all public goods as well, right? Because the more you plant to increase the monoculture fraction of red, the higher the growth rate is, and that helps everyone. But they're mutually exclusive, right? Because the more red you make it, the less blue you're making it, and everything. So one way to see it is that this is a collective action problem where there's kind of two parts. In the beginning, there's a startup problem where you have to decide, you're afraid to waste effort on the wrong color that's not going to win, and you don't want to be caught out alone supporting a color no one else is supporting, and you don't want to bet on the wrong horse. And then as you get closer to finally having a pretty high monoculture fraction, then there's a free rider problem. You're tempted to just explore, just exploit and just eat the berries that are around you and not contribute planting more and more. So there's two kinds of problems here, and they're interwoven. So I can talk about norms. Maybe that's not important. Basically, all that I wanted to say here is that one way we think about norms is that they are a bit like conventions, but they are supported by sanctioning. Okay. So that's how we're going to ultimately try to solve this problem. So let's think about how normativity works, like how this kind of model of a social norm works. So in this view, there are three parts, really. There's a classification stage, enforcement, and compliance. This is how we think about norms. And you have to learn all of these things. That's what's important. That's what's different here from some other models. So you have to learn when you see a transgression. You have to learn how to act when you see a transgression. That's enforcement. And you have to learn how to avoid transgressing. And then we also assume that being the target of enforcement is aversive. So it's like bad to be sanctioned by others. And what we're going to try to set up is a model where sanctioning ends up supporting these pro-social conventions in this model, in this allelopathic harvest game. And so this is the agent model that we ended up coming up with. We call it the classifier norm model. And the way it works is like this. So agents are, as with all of our environments, there's a bunch of agents, 16 in this case, they're all living in a world together, and they're all learning at the same time by reinforcement learning and adapting. But in addition, they're also learning a classifier, which is a different kind of machine learning model, which is just taking in observations and outputting a label. And in this case, the label is what others are approving or disapproving of. And that's entirely learned by what are they sanctioning. So as agents walk around, they see sanctioning happen, like they see agents zap each other, and then they treat that as evidence that, whatever it is that agent just did, that is something that the others are disapproving of. And they update their model of what the group disapproves of based on that. And then the last ingredient is a motivation to punish the same things that they think the group wants to punish. Each agent is independently learning that. So they're independently learning all the parts of this. They're all independently learning their own classifier, but based on the same kind of data, because they see the same things. And then they are learning how to enforce. They're learning, when they see something that they think the group disapproves of, they learn how to chase agents and zap them and do this actual sanctioning. And then, because they themselves are also the targets of everyone else's sanctioning, they learn how to comply with the norm and learn how to avoid transgressing. And when you do this, this moves you much closer to the pro-social norms in this game. So this is this simplex picture again, where the different the corners are the different pro-social conventions, red, blue, and green. That's why they're labeled RBG. In the baseline side, the left side, is these are results from running it without the classifier norm model, just running the tabula rasa self-interested agent model that I was talking about in the beginning. And then on the right, we see results from running the classifier norm model, which has the classifier here. And you can see that basically all the dots move closer to the corners of the simplex. So they're getting much further toward the pro-social outcomes. Basically, there are bandwagons here that they are jumping on. It's amplifying whatever patterns they had at the beginning, which move them out further to the corners here. And they end up punishing something, which makes it so more likely that they're doing something else, and that gets them further. Yeah, so this works well. One thing that's interesting about it is, remember I said that half the agents like red berries, half the agents like green berries, and none of the agents like blueberries. This model is just as likely to land on red equilibria as green equilibria as blue equilibria. Even though no one prefers blue equilibria, it's just as likely to land on them because they're not rationally thinking ahead, like what, which equilibrium would be a Pareto, the blue equilibrium is Pareto dominated by both red and green. So it is strictly worse, however you think about it, but it is just as likely to land there because it's just as likely that the initial bandwagon starts going that direction as it is to go to the others, which I think is a good property of a model of social norms, because social norms really have lots of arbitrary content like that. So I think this is a promising feature. Yeah, this is a model of the emergence of the content of norms. So okay, I'm basically wrapping up here. I just wanted to come back to this Savage's proverbs here about the difference between the traditional matrix game world, where you can look before you leap because you have all of the possibilities in some sense there at the start, versus large worlds where you must sometimes cross that bridge when you come to it. And I think now, hopefully I've been, the things I've been talking about have made it clear that we have models which are still reductionist, but can do interesting things, that are in large worlds where agents are exploring, and there could be unknown unknowns and things to discover. But they're still tractable. That's the point here. They're tractable worlds that are larger than simple ones, and we can potentially use them for all kinds of science purposes here. So I'll probably leave it at that. The last thing I say as I take questions is just that we have this thing called Melting Pot, which is an open source project. It's a kind of collection of lots of different environments of the kind that I've been talking about today, and lots of other things with all kinds of different incentive structures, all different kinds of modeled resources, and it's very, it's an open source project. Anyone can use it, and you can send us emails, and we can add to it. We can help you add to it, and you can, we're supporting it and using it. So my email's there. And thank you again so much for inviting me. I'm happy to take questions now.